Welcome to the Biohacking Superhuman Performance Podcast. My name is Natalie Needham. I'm a nutritionist, a human potential and epigenetic coach, and I created this podcast to bring you the latest ways to take control of your health and longevity. We cover it all, from new technology to ancestral health practices, personalized interventions, and a very special interest of mine, peptides. Enjoy the show. Hey folks, just one thing before we get into the episode, and that is a word about our podcast sponsor this week, and that is Primeadine, made by Oxford HealthSpan, which is the brainchild of my good friend Leslie Kenny. Primeadine is an incredible source of spermidine. Spermidine is one of the most incredible supplements that I have come across in a long time. It addresses 6 of the 9 hallmarks of aging. And this particular Spermidine product is incredible for a bunch of different reasons. One, it's super clean. There's nothing but spermidine and prebiotics that will support your body's own production of spermidine in the capsule. It is a high quality wheat germ extract. And what they've done to make sure that it doesn't go rancid and go bad is they've defatted it. They've removed all the fat, all those delicate omega-6 oils that can be good for you in certain contexts. But once they go rancid, and they go rancid very quickly, it's anything but good for you. So Primeadine addresses 6 of the 9 hallmarks of aging, folks. Everything from the proper folding of proteins to autophagy, to cellular communication, the proper DNA protection. Did I say autophagy? Anyway, 6 different hallmarks. If you follow me on Instagram, you can go look for a couple of posts I've written about spermidine, and you will see why this is a supplement that I include in my stack every single day. And frankly, it is part of the foundation stack for every one of my clients. So if you decide you want to give Primeadine a try for yourself, you're going to want to go to primeadine.com and use promo code BIONAT15, and you will get 15% off your supplement. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with is that not only is Primeadine doing all this incredible work under the hood to keep you healthy and rejuvenate your body and keep you youthful and vital, but on top of that, you're going to see it on the inside because you're going to grow stronger nails, better skin, and thicker, better hair. It is actually quite the most amazing thing. I haven't seen too many supplements where I've gotten so much positive feedback from my clients and from my group followers. So by all means, if you haven't given this stuff a try yet, you must, but you will know that it will take a good month or 2 before you start to see the effects and the benefits. So if this resonates for you, give it a shot. You won't be sorry. And now, enjoy the episode. Hey folks, just a little bit of housekeeping before we launch into the episode. Please remember that all of the information provided in these podcasts is for information purposes only. We are never offering treatments, cures, whatever, for any kind of disease or medical condition. Anything you hear about here is going to be intriguing. There's some research around it, but make sure that you check with your medical provider before you go off and do any of this stuff for yourself. All right. So enjoy the episode. And also, if you're looking to connect with me for any reason, with your comments, questions, whatever it may be, you can reach me through my website, which is natnidham.com, or you can find me on Facebook in the Optimizing Superhuman Performance group, or on MeWe in the Biohacking Superhuman Performance group. And of course, you can also follow me on Instagram, which is at Natalie Needham. Natalie is with an H between the T and the A, the second A. So thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you guys. Enjoy the episode. Well, good afternoon, Dr. Matt Dawson. It's exciting to be here with you today. I am here today, guys, with, as I just said, Dr. Matt Dawson, who is the founder and CEO of Wild Health. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So thank you so much for agreeing to be here, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, as am I. Thanks so much for having me.
Great. Lucky for us, Matt remembered his mic, which reminded me that I didn't have my mic. So you guys are going to get to the pleasure of hearing both of us speak today. So I've been aware of Wild Health now for a few years, ever since I first heard you and your business partner Dr. Mike Mallon speak on another podcast, the big, great, amazing Ben Greenfield podcast. And I've always loved your approach to health. I mean, it's always really spoken to where my beliefs are as well. And, I've always kind of had an eye, like when I heard that you guys were having a summit, which we'll talk about in a little while. But, for those listeners who are relatively new to you and your approach, why don't we start there? Why don't we start with, well, actually, before we get to your approach, why don't we kind of start about how you started all this? Because, this is more than a medical practice. You've got a very different approach to health, I think, than most companies, most doctors and practices. So why don't we start there?
Sure. And it wasn't always that way. Mike and I were in the traditional medical system before. We were physicians. In our prior job, we were teaching a lot of other physicians. So we were teaching kind of a technological skill that not a lot of doctors had. We were traveling a lot. We were kind of international, like a couple times a month, really moving around, working in the university system, but within the system. And while we were doing that, we started to see a lot of evidence coming out around genomics and precision medicine, personalized medicine. And we had all heard those buzzwords for over a decade. But we started to see a lot of evidence come out that maybe you really could do something with this. And as it was coming out, as we were seeing that, Mike also went kind of through a health scare, an issue. I still remember where I was teaching a course in San Francisco, and I got a text from him, and it was lipid numbers, and they were just through the roof. And they weren't like a little elevated like people overreact to, but they were really dangerous levels. And we were surprised because we were both doing ultra marathons, like living very healthy, and it just didn't make sense. So he went to see his doctor. They put him on a diet that works for most people, but he got worse. His doctor also wanted to put him on a statin. We were a little worried about that just from the risks of muscle breakdown, myopathy. And sure enough, he got those. He didn't tolerate it at all. Yeah. And as he's going through this, we each sequenced our own DNA because we saw, you can do that. You could run through your raw data through all these different programs, really dig in. And we started digging in. We saw pretty quickly that he needed to be on the opposite diet of what he'd been put on. And we also saw that he had a specific single nucleotide polymorphism that made him almost guaranteed to get muscle breakdown and myopathy from a statin.
From statins. That's so interesting. So what was the diet he was put on, and what was the diet in the end that, what was that? Did he get put like on a super low fat kind of diet?
Yeah, so good question. So actually, initially he tried a ketogenic diet.
Okay.
And I had had really good success with that. My numbers look great. And if you look at the meta-analyses, most people do better with that diet when they get off kind of the standard American diet and do that. However, he didn't. He got a lot worse. And with the kind of the myopathy issue, which was really the bigger issue, and him having this SNP that it's clearly he shouldn't have been on that. And it kind of angered us. We're like, why did his physician not know this? And then we realized, well, no one is doing it.
Yeah, nobody's looking at that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And in the diet, it's an interesting thing about the diet too. We noticed when we looked at both of our DNA, we had really different DNA when it came to a lot of these like saturated fat markers like PPAR alpha, PPAR gamma, these FTOs. I had almost none. He had all of these. And then it made sense why I was tolerating and eating a very animal-based diet, and he needed to be on an extremely plant-based diet with very little saturated fat in order for us to kind of perform good, have our markers good, and really, really feel good. And that's what sent us down the rabbit hole and really digging in, just our personal experience there. And we pretty quickly saw that, okay, there is a ton of evidence here. There's a massive difference in what the science says and what we're practicing right now. And that made us start treating our friends and family and then other physicians who trusted us. And the results we got with them just led us to saying, hey, we're going to leave traditional medicine and we're going to do this. No one is doing it. It needs to be done. And that's how we got into this several years ago.
That's amazing. I love that. I think that I've always been a huge proponent of personalized diets. And I got into epigenetic tests or genomic testing myself a few years ago. And it is always amazing to me that even, there's the PPARG, that's the genetic privilege around saturated fat gene, right? Mm-hmm. And I, of course, have the version where too much saturated fat it's like lights me up on fire. right? It's going to drive inflammation in my body, the whole 9 yards. And then you get these people who literally need to consume carb in order to burn fat. And it makes for it brings so much nuance to helping people to understand what diet, and really helps people to step away from the whole rhetoric of, I think, the narrative that's going on right now, which we were just talking about before the podcast, which is, I almost feel like diet is becoming a political issue between these very extreme forms of diet, between one camp that's vegan and, for any number of, whether it's philosophical or whatever reasons, and even for the planet, adamant that, veganism is the path forward, versus another camp, which is at the other extreme, which is the carnivore crowd, who believe the dead opposite. And so, to be able to look at someone's individual situation and help them to choose what's going to work for their body and acknowledge that everybody's not the same, I think is such a powerful line. Do you ever find, though, when you're working with someone on genomics, like, are there limitations to what you can really pull out of genomics? Like, do you ever see people who on paper should be doing one thing and yet in practice it seems to kind of not pan out?
Yeah, for sure. And so we can do a lot. Like, we know a lot right now compared to what we knew 5 years ago. What we will know in 5 years from now, we know very little. So it's important to kind of have that humility around it, because like right now, if someone comes to us, we take a very holistic approach. So we sequence their DNA, but that DNA, that's kind of your operating system. That's only about 20% of your health outcome. Like the epigenetics and how you express it, what you eat, what you're exposed to, your stress levels, those turn on and off all these good and bad genes. So we also do a deep dive in your blood work, like the microbiome, do a lot of questionnaires. So in taking that really holistic approach, we can make more precision recommendations. We can give better advice, but they're precision recommendations. They're not perfect recommendations. Like we still need to have humility around it. And there's so much we don't know about the human body that when we make a precision recommendation, we need to identify an objective marker of success. How are we going to measure if this is working or not? And then we need to revisit it. So although we may be more precise, we're still not perfect. And it's really important to have that humility and to have the relationship with the patient, the ongoing relationship where over time is when you really optimize someone.
Yeah, I love that. And then you just mentioned something that I was writing right before you said it, and that is the microbiome. Like, do you find, like, to me, I feel like the microbiome is the wild card. And it's just like genomics, as we know way more than we did 5 years ago. And I think actually on the side of the microbiome, we probably know less, even than genomics. It's again, like, so many companies out there now are saying, come to us, we're going to map your microbiome. We're going to tell you what to eat and how to eat and the whole 9 yards. And I'm like, really? Because I'm not so I mean, it's a starting point. But again, I think we're still in a world, as you're saying, we're in a fluid matrix where we're still helping people to self-experiment and find that path to what's really working for them. What are you finding is your best source of information on microbiome health and how it's going to interact with those genomics to maybe shift people one way or another?
Sure. So what we know about the microbiome is that it's extremely important. However, we know almost nothing about what to do about it and how to affect it. And it's like the depths of the ocean. We know there's really incredible stuff there. We just don't know what's incredible yet or what to do. Like, we have all these associations, but no real clear causations, no real clear thing to do. So it's difficult. Like, I think we do frequently look at the microbiome. If someone has really poor diversity or a lot of inflammation, it can lead us down certain paths to try to make interventions. But I think a lot of the companies that are making very specific claims, like you mentioned, of telling you what to eat and stuff, I think they're out over their skis on that. I don't think they're really supported by a lot of evidence. And we continue to watch the space, and we do have it built into our algorithms. There are some things that we can do, but what I find is that we do the genomic testing and the blood work. We always find multiple targets and multiple things to help people optimize. With the microbiome, we frequently do, but not always. And so it's an emerging field that I'm excited about, but it's definitely early, and you got to be careful with the claims around the microbiome.
Yeah, it's funny, because I recently, having a podcast now, I'm in this world where people will send me stuff to try. Hey, Nat, I've got this really amazing stuff. You need to try this. And I'm like, okay, I'm in. That's my job. I'm here to try different things. And I got sent a product, and it's all, it's this prebiotic. It's kind of a fermented product, and, just drink a little bit of this every morning. It's going to reset your microbiome. It's going to be amazing for your digestion. And I did it I started 3 days. I used this product for 3 days, first thing in the morning. And honestly, it was amazing. I felt great. I was like, going to the bathroom like clockwork. Everything was awesome. Day 4 rolls along. And if I had been like it was like I was 3 months pregnant, like literally it, not to mention how painful it was. And I'm sitting there, you're sitting there trying to figure out, did I eat a bad egg? Did I eat sushi last night? Is it possible that something I ate wasn't cooked properly? Like and you finally realize, and I think the conclusion I came to after a couple of days, because then the next day I took a half dose and felt a little bit better, but I was still embarrassingly bloated. And I realized that, it's coming to this one size fits all thing. And what's probably happening for me is there's a lot of foods I've kind of knocked out over the last few months for any number of reasons. And a lot of those foods are fermented and present in this product. And that doesn't make the product bad, but it means that me dumping like this very concentrated source of these factors, whatever they are, into my gut all at once caused mayhem. I mean, I think that what happened was there were there are bugs that maybe have been starved out, others that have come up, and it just turned into a gong show. Wow. So, but what it did show me, though, what was interesting is I don't think I've ever really experienced that even from a probiotic pill, like something that dramatic. And what I think was interesting for me about this was how powerful a food product can actually be in getting into and impacting that microbiome. Have you found that? Like, do you use a lot of probiotics in your practice? Because probiotics, again, like it's very hit and miss, right? It's almost like cultivating a monoculture in a world that is supposed to be so diverse.
Yeah, we do sometimes, not a whole lot though, just because again, the evidence is not great for them. It's mixed. And so in general, again, our kind of decision-making, one, like a point you made about like affected you in a positive way than a negative way. Everyone is different. Everyone's going to respond differently. So the way we approach any kind of decision-making like that is, okay, what is the evidence for it first off? But then we know that everyone is going to respond differently. So is it going to be harmful? Probably not. Okay, then what is the evidence for it being helpful? Okay, and then what is your DNA, blood work, symptoms, everything else? Then we can make a decision. But what we also like to do is be very data-driven about it. So for example, if we were talking about you potentially trying this, I'd first maybe think deeply about what objective marker could we look at to call this success or harm. And if we can't find one, that's okay. Sometimes we'll just go with a subjective one. I mean,
how do you feel?
Yeah, exactly. And we maybe say, hey, let's look at your Oura Ring data or your Whoop, or see what your HRV and your sleep patterns are. See if it affects that. That may be some data, or just how you feel. But it's important, I think, to prospectively kind of line up these tests for individuals, do these N of 1 studies. And that's generally how we approach something like that, where there's not a ton of evidence or it's mixed evidence. We can still try it, but we want to follow along and try to decide whether to continue it, whether it's helpful or harmful for you.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, for this one, I'm definitely taking a couple of days away from it just to give myself a chance to recover. But, the question, what I will probably do is go back at it, but in microdose, just to see if I can, because those first 3 good days it's an interesting paradigm, right? It's an interesting contrast. And could it be a situation of too much of a good thing for me? So you bring up another interesting point. So it sounds like you use a lot of self-quantification tools with your patients. And I think that's such an incredible trend that we're now seeing in medical practices that have moved in the direction that you've moved into, really is helping to empower the patient.
Yeah, we love data. I mean, that's we start out with. We start out with an incredible. I remember when we first started doing this. I remember seeing patients, and I'd have hundreds of pages of DNA data, microbiome data, blood work, all this data, and it would take 10 hours to put together. Now, luckily, we have a software program that does it all in automated fashion for us. That's helpful. But then going forward, we love data and objective data as well when we can get it. So when someone says they're not sleeping well, for example, I say, okay, like, let's talk about it. Tell me why, what's going on. But then also, before we do some interventions, let's measure it. So like most of our patients will wear an Oura ring. And so then when I may look at their DNA and say, hey, look, you have a FAAH, fatty acid amide hydrolase SNP. So CBD may benefit you. And so we can try that, but we'll try it for a week with your ring on and then a week without, just to compare. Or people do great with magnesium, do great with so many different interventions. But as we try those, we want to be able to measure them as well. And the wearables are great for that, being able to quantify and not just get the subjective, how did you sleep last night?
Yeah, for sure. And I find that it really gets, well, at least some people, again, we have different types of people, but for some people, it's such a motivator because it almost gamifies and really draws them in. Kind of, it brings them on board as a participant in this whole process, as opposed to being a passive, tell me what to do, doc, you fix me, which I think is probably something that you've moved away from as you left conventional medicine behind and moved into what you're doing now.
Yeah. Well, we know what gets measured gets managed. And we also know the Hawthorne effect is a real thing. If you're tracking your food, or you're wearing a CGM, I have a CGM on right now. Most of our patients wear CGMs, or you're wearing an Oura ring, you're just going to be better about your bedtime routine or what you eat. So there is that positive effect from it. And then you're right. It gamifies it for them. And they also have some accountability. They know someone's going to be looking at it too. I think there is a potential occasional dark side to it also. Like some people get somewhat obsessive. And so it's important to note that when it happens. But most people, I think it's a net positive.
Yeah, I find with the negativity of it, for most people, again, there's always the exception, but for most people, it's helping them to understand that this is just a source of information. This is not a judgment. This is not a competition. I mean, it can be a little bit of a competition, but it's not a race. We're just collecting data. It's going to be okay.
Yeah. And it's a small piece of the entire pie too. You don't want someone to put so much weight on one individual marker that they're tracking either.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit. I mean, if you're willing to, can we talk a little bit about the algorithm and the software program that you've developed? Because I think that's so interesting, right? Probably like how long did it take for you to realize, holy jumping, like we've got all this data, we can't go on like this. We're drowning in data. And
pretty quick. So, to me, I just mentioned it would take us 10 hours of prep time. And the problem with that, like we're nerds, like we kind of enjoy that a little bit, but at the same time, you can only help a certain number of people. So we had an immediate problem when we started, and that we had more people that wanted this than we can help. And when you tell people that, people get it intuitively when you say, like, look, your diet, your exercise, everything should be based on you as an individual. So people want that type of care, but the amount of time it would take to crunch the data was, it just made it too expensive. And I grew up without much, and where I'm from, people couldn't really do this, and that bothered us. So we knew the solution was a technological one. Let a doctor be a doctor and have a program crunch the data. So we hired pretty quickly. We hired the lady who started the data informatics program for Humana. We hired several other data scientists and software engineers. And it took about 2 years, but we were able to kind of take everything that we were doing in our brain, all these algorithms, these if-thens, a lot of artificial intelligence is added to come up with a software program. We call that Clarity is the program. And so that's what we use to be able to see a lot more patients, to get the price way down. It's much less expensive now. Now it can be done for less than $100 a month. And we're getting ready in the near future to probably even do it with insurance so that anyone can afford it. But we also created that program because no matter how many patients we can see individually, which we can see more with that, we still weren't going to make the impact and be able to get personalized medicine out to the masses, to everyone, without something that could go to other practitioners. So now we actually have other physicians, other health coaches, other providers actually using that software and providing this precision medicine as well.
That's amazing. So you make your software available not just to medical doctors, like also to other types of practitioners?
So great question. So right now, the way we practice is a combination of physicians and health coaches. I think honestly, the health coaches are a little more important when it comes to impact. Like the physicians kind of make the plan, come up with the plan, they can prescribe and they can order tests. And then you come up with this plan, and the health coach and the patient are really partnering on implementing, and the motivation and accountability as well. So we have this kind of mix. The software itself right now, mainly it's physicians licensing it. We're working on different versions so that anyone or other people could license it. The trick with that is around these kind of FDA, SAMD, software as a medical device regulations. Like to be able to let anyone use it, we have to strip out some of what would be considered providing medical care. Yeah. So it's a little tricky right now. It is licensed to physicians who work with health coaches, but in the future we'll have something that you don't have to be a physician to use as well.
That's amazing. I love that. And so we were talking earlier also about, no, we already talked about that. I was going to bring back the carnivore diet. Well, I could bring back the carnivore diet. Like I think that diet is such a hot topic. Do you have an opinion on these extreme diets, which frankly, people in both camps would argue it's not extreme. This is the diet we're supposed to be eating. And they're, they can be very compelling. Yeah. Right. And we certainly have people, certainly on the carnivore side and even on the vegan side sometimes, but I think on the vegan side, it's more a question of someone coming off a SAD diet and seeing you're going to feel better no matter what you eat. It's not coming off a standard American diet. But can we talk a little bit just about these extremes, what you've seen and your thoughts on them?
Sure. It's always tough to talk about diet because it's almost like religion. It's like people have their own religious belief around like, this is the diet. But we take a very different approach. It is a very personalized approach. I never tell a patient, hey, do a carnivore diet or do a vegan diet, or really name them, because it doesn't help a whole lot. It's kind of a shortcut, like people kind of know what you mean, but I find it much more helpful to talk about specific foods and ways of eating. So I will answer your question directly though, just about the extreme diets. Sometimes we will kind of use them in a therapeutic sense. So someone has a lot of autoimmune issues, for example, or something like that, or a lot of inflammation. We can't figure out where it's coming from and resolve. Sometimes it is good just in order for someone to get off. You mentioned the SAD, the standard American diet. Sometimes they do need kind of an extreme diet as kind of a reset. But most of these really limiting diets, whether it's strict vegan or carnivore or whatever it is, they're hard to sustain. And I don't really necessarily think they should be sustained completely. Like we are omnivores, and some people like myself with my genetics do a lot better with a lot more animal products in my diet. And then some people like Mike, he eats pretty much a vegan diet. He'll eat some fish and occasionally some meat, but with his genetics and my genetics, they're so different that we have very different diets. We're both omnivores. It's just the percentage of our diet that are from plants or animals are vastly different. And I don't think you can peg a certain percentage, 90-10 either way, to someone without actually getting to know them and looking at their blood work and their genetics and other things like that. So I don't have strong opinions for or against any specific diet. It just depends on the person and not even just the person, but the person in their specific situation. Like at different times in your life, you may need to eat different types of diets as well. My wife is mainly vegetarian. She's pescatarian, but when we have 4 kids, and with a couple of the kids, she would just find herself all of a sudden in the line at Chick-fil-A. Like she's like, how did I get here? I don't do this. I don't eat meat. And then she just is craving meat or other things. Like when she's pregnant, she needs some sort of nutrient. So even individuals at different times in their life may need different diets as well. And so that's why I don't find it super helpful to say this diet's good, this one's bad.
I think that's such a great point, that acknowledging that, you have these different layers, right? Different people need different things as a baseline, but then even within that, different people are going to need different things at different times of their life, depending on their situation.
Yeah.
And it could be life stage. It could be, are you being an athlete or are you being sedentary? Are you, for a woman, like, where are you in your stage of life? Are you making babies? Are you postmenopausal? Like, all of these things are going to come into play. And, I find one of the hardest thing to get people's heads around sometimes is what worked for you before may not work for you right now. And it's okay. And it's probably one of the biggest arguments for helping people to overcome this diet as religion kind of position, right? So that they themselves can become more fluid and accepting of what their body needs, instead of this, I don't know, emotional, political, whatever you want to call it, position that kind of gets in the way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I played a couple sports in college and did Ironmans, and now I'm an old man just trying to keep up with 4 kids. So like my diet is vastly different, like what I ate then versus now. And it has to be, I have a completely different lifestyle. So everyone's different and every stage of their life is different too. And what they should eat to fuel their body. Yeah,
no, that's amazing. Well, you may go back to being marathon men. You never know.
I've got a 11, 9, 5, and 3-year-old. So it's hard to.
Oh, it'll be a while.
The endurance stuff, taking time from them.
Although I have to say, one of my favorite pictures of my son is when he was 5 doing he did one of those little kid triathlons. It was so cute. My husband had to get in the pool with him to get him across the pool. You can get them into this stuff pretty early, and it's kind of fun.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I should totally do that.
I think half the fun is just being there with them and watching them go through it. Okay, so we talked a little bit, and I'm guessing that your approach is so personalized that, is there a patient profile you work with, or you guys are probably pretty much bring it and let's solve it kind of thing, right?
Yeah, we only work with humans.
Yeah.
No, that's it. No, I mean, in all seriousness,
veterinary patients. Yeah.
Yeah. We have some patients who are, we have a lot of pro athletes. We have several patients who are Olympians who won medals. And then we also have 80-something-year-olds with Alzheimer's and dementia and cancer, and patients with difficult problems too. So we see the entire gamut. That's important to us. And we think that while everyone is individualized and their care is personalized and different, we actually start the same way with everyone, which is just simply a really holistic approach. The DNA, the blood work, sometimes the microbiome, long questionnaires, a long history, take that really holistic view. And that's the right approach in our mind to every patient. And then you go down the different routes of you have performance goals. You just want to feel better. What's going on with you?
Yeah, goals. I mean, understanding where someone wants to get is definitely a huge piece of the puzzle. I was actually in a conversation with a couple of other practitioners not that long ago, and we were talking about women's body composition, which gets to be a very crazy topic, and especially postmenopausal women. And you've got, a couple of these women out there they're gifted, right? They look as good in their 50s as they did in their 30s, but they are this much of the population. But putting it out there, hey, all you got to do is do what I do, and you too. And I'm sitting there going, I'm calling BS on that. Like, not to mention the fact that I think the question comes down at the end is, what's it worth to you? Like, how far are you willing to go to achieve this essentially aesthetic goal at a stage in your life where it's going to be a bit of an uphill climb? And I remember a trainer saying that to me. I'm like, I'm not happy at this body fat percentage. I want to be there. He goes, all right, Nat. So how much are you willing to invest in this in terms of time, energy, focus, your diet, your workouts, your this and your that? Like, how important is it? Would you rather just be healthy, or are you going to become obsessive about it? Not that there's anything wrong with that, but what's the outcome you're really looking for? And then I think in a way it can help people to restore some balance in terms of their approach, so that they become a little less obsessed with some weird ideal that, whether it's the media or social pressures or whatever, have told them this is what they need to be looking for.
Yeah, I think maybe the one topic I'm more nervous to talk about than religion and food is women's body composition. But no, I hear you. And it's important. I mean, I mentioned earlier, the goals, and with every patient we start with, okay, what are your top 3 goals? And then we're going to partner with them and try to get there. But sometimes you'll get a goal of weight loss, for example, like you were talking about. And great, like a lot of times that's important to be healthy, but it's also important to ask the question frequently, okay, great, that's your goal. Now, why is that your goal? And then they answer, and then another, like, why is that your goal? And then they answer, and one more, why is that important? They say, well, because I want to be happy. And like, okay, why don't we just go straight to the happy part? Like, why don't we talk about some mindfulness and let's dig into that. Because that's a big part of our practice too. Like we want to honor people's goals and what they want to achieve, but sometimes some redirection and kind of focus on mindfulness and well-being and what makes you truly happy. Sometimes that's our job as well, as a little bit of redirection.
Yeah, that's I love that you just said that, helping people to dig past the surface and get to the bottom of what it is that they're really after, and then helping them to see, is fitting into a size 2, is that really the thing that you're after? Is that really going to make you happy in the way that you're looking for happiness? So, which is a great segue actually to something else I was going to ask you, which is, we've talked about diet, we've talked about microbiome, we've talked about genetics and exercise, but what are the other pieces that you work with people on? And it sounds like you're not leaving behind, because this whole idea of how big a factor is stress that you're seeing, and certainly over the last year and a half or whatever it is now, like, have you actually seen stress show up, like your patients show up differently because of what's happening in the world?
For sure. And one of the things I say frequently is that there is no health without the mental health part. And so we really do, that is a passion of ours. We really do focus on it. You kind of, a lot of times you have to, like what I was talking about redirecting earlier, you kind of have to earn the right with someone to do that. You got to earn their trust a little bit. But as soon as we can get to that point with someone, we do focus on that. So we, in general, when we see someone, we do focus on, we start with the big fundamental things that they come to us for. Like, let's talk about the perfect diet for you, perfect exercise program. Let's optimize your sleep. Let's reduce your cardiovascular risk and your dementia risk and your inflammation. But we also have built in mindfulness and stress mitigation from the beginning. And usually we focus on those a little later, unless someone is interested in immediately, because usually there's some low-hanging fruit. We can fix your vitamin D level and omega-3 level and inflammation and all that. But once someone is actually trusting enough to really talk about and focus on the mindfulness, that's very exciting for us, because we see such tremendous gains, like even just your biomarkers and other things improving. It makes a big difference. So we actually have developed a specific 6-month track for our patients who are interested on mindfulness. So we took kind of the mindfulness-based stress reduction course that John Kabat-Zinn developed, and we have our own kind of version of that, somewhat over 6 months, with videos and teaching and workbooks and helping people work through and figure out the right types of mindfulness and meditation practice for them. Because while all the other stuff is really cool that we do, and the scientific and the DNA stuff, like, I don't think there's any bigger impact we have than we can really get someone to be more mindful.
Yeah. Well, when you consider that meditation is one of the few ways we have at our disposal to actually help to lengthen telomeres, whatever you think about telomeres, whether you think they're the cat's meow or not in aging and disease, they're a thing. Having super short telomeres is not a good thing any way you slice it. And when you imagine that this act of nothing, right, this act of actually affecting your stress from the inside out can have such a powerful impact on your longevity and your health, really is it's a pretty big thing when you can help people to see that and embrace it.
Yeah. And reducing stress is important in and of itself, but there are just so much science and so much data on the other benefits of that for longevity and for just everything else that has such downstream effects, that it's a really important part of taking care of any person.
Yeah, I think it would be so interesting to look at all these long-lived people. And I don't know if anybody's done it, maybe somebody has, and see how many of them are type A wired, to the nines, kind of spinning around people. I think those guys, if they haven't figured out a ballast to that wiredness, somehow I have a feeling we're not going to find too many of them in the centenarian crowd.
Well, we do a lot of epigenetic testing, epigenetic age testing with our patients. And it just anecdotally, I'll tell you, hard charging entrepreneur founder, like those folks, they invariably usually do not get great scores. Like they're usually older biologically than they are chronologically. So we're definitely seeing that anecdotally in our practice.
Amazing. And so it's funny, I was just thinking, I wonder if I should ask him that question. And I'm not surprised that you brought it up. So have you had good success in helping those people and sometimes it's not so much about turning back the clock as it is slowing that rate of aging. I mean, there's different language that's used around that kind of testing. And I think it's so interesting that it's become accessible and affordable. And it's such a fascinating metric for people to look at. Have you been working with it long enough where you've seen people actually slow the clock down or maybe even regain some of those years?
I tell you, anecdotally, we have. I hesitate to say that though, because I generally like to have really solid and big data to back up something like that. So we've ran a lot of data on other markers in our patients, which have been really good results. We don't really have a big enough or number or time to really say definitively, hey, on average, we reduce biologic age by this much. And honestly, the tools themselves, they're getting better, but they're still somewhat crude. So I wouldn't even know how big of a sample you would need before I'd actually trust the result. But anecdotally, it does seem that a lot of the interventions, when you're really just focusing on the basics of sleep and diet and exercise, they can make a difference.
Mm-hmm. And so there's two other big topics I want to kind of touch on with you, because I've heard you speak to peptides before. So I believe that, do you use those in your practice yet, or you do, right?
We do. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, guys, I didn't ask the question ahead of time. So fishing here.
We do. We use peptides. We use quite a few different peptides, but on a very individualized basis with patients. Okay.
And do you tend to use them more for, I guess, are you more in the kind of healing modalities, or because there's these two different categories of peptides, right? You've got the bioregulators that was particularly like epitalon, which is seen as more of a longevity kind of type peptide. And then you've got the other ones that might be more interventional, if you will, in terms of specific situations.
Yeah, we do, like BPC 157 obviously is a very common one. So we have a lot of injuries with our athletes, and we'll frequently use that. Yes, epitalon we use in some longevity protocols that we have as well. We'll use sometimes thymosin alpha, thymosin beta, ipamorelin and CJC occasionally in certain circumstances. So there's quite a few that we use, but they're usually on pretty individualized areas. If someone has a specific goal that they come up with and we think it's going to be helpful and the benefit much outweigh the risk, then we'll use it. It's a little difficult to assess risk because they seem like they're very low risk. We just don't have an incredible amount of data yet. So we don't use them cavalierly. We do try to have good conversations with patients and be honest about how much we know and don't know about specific peptides, but we do use them.
Nice. All right. So let's flip to the other side and move into nature, because you've got a living wall behind you. You chose Wild Health as the name for your company, your organization. And so let's talk about that a little bit, because I think that nature plays such a big role and it taps into the whole stress management thing and the whole 9 yards and really speaks to the whole person. So do we want to talk about the wild piece of Wild Health a bit?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the wild, we call it that. It really means two things. One is kind of the wild cutting edge genomic stuff and science stuff we do, but then it also is an allusion to the wilderness and to nature. And we think that a lot of our problems in society today have to do with our disconnection from nature and from creation. And so we also try to bring that element in and really try to encourage people to, biohack in more natural ways frequently too, when they can. I mean, the more that we can be outside, there's a lot of evidence and studies on this. So the Japanese have done a great job of studying this, and their forest bathing or Shinrin Roku that they practice. They've shown really good things, decreased rates of cancer when people live really close to trees and are in nature a lot, decreased inflammation, better immune response. And there's a lot of really cool data out of Japanese studies on that. We haven't studied that as much in the US, but I think people just in general get it and understand, like they feel better when they're in nature.
And so how do you help your clients? Because you deal with people you practice telehealth. Am I correct? Like you don't just work with people close to you, because you live in a place where you are close to nature, but you're going to have patients obviously who are living in big cities. Mm-hmm. How do you help people to, are there biohacks that you like, do you hack it, or is it just a question of getting people to get out in nature, which sometimes is easier said than done?
Yeah, I think it's mainly education. I mean, when you tell people, for example, hey, your blood pressure's high, and there's really good studies on being in nature and reducing blood pressure. There's a great study of cholecystectomies, people getting their gallbladder out, and the patients who had a view of trees in their window in the hospital recovered faster than the ones that didn't.
You're kidding.
We know that with sleep optimization, a really big part of that is getting outside and sunlight in the morning. So I think just educating people and helping them build that into their day, and almost treating it like a prescription. Like if you have high blood pressure, like we could give you a medication, or we could just, hey, be in nature, do some forest bathing a couple times a week or once a day, or however often you're able to. So the education and kind of treating it like a prescription is one of the ways we encourage people to do that.
That's such a nice approach, actually. And even and so do you subscribe also to the whole idea of being barefoot on the ground, like the whole earthing and grounding aspect of being, because there's the light, obviously, and you brought up morning light, which is so important. I even also like people to get out close to the end of the day around sunset and get some of those rays that inform the brain almost. It's almost like I describe it almost as orienting the brain as to where we are in time and time to start those processes. I mean, hopefully our body knows, but as we all sit inside in front of artificial light, all day long with very little natural inputs, it's almost like shutting our bodies off from the natural triggers that would normally help to guide those processes as we move through the day.
Yeah, our life is about rhythms with the seasons and with the days. And when we disconnect ourselves from that, it's no wonder that we lose something. I mean, people don't sleep great. It's not just the light, like in the morning and the evening and that signal, but it's also the temperature. Historically, it's been warm and hot, and then it gets cool at night, but we're inside in the same temperature the entire time. And then we're at nighttime, we have all these bright blue lights shining on us. It's just, I don't know why we're surprised that we have so many health issues and sleep issues.
No kidding. That's so amazing. Okay. So let's talk for our last and final topic, although we may come up with a few others along the way. So you mentioned earlier about bringing other practitioners into the fold so that you can impact more people, so that you can kind of spread the love of this type of patient care model that you've come up with, which is I love it because it's so complete. It's so all encompassing of so many different things. Let's talk about the summit. You've hosted a few summits, and also, I mean, your authenticity is amazing, right? And you have a summit coming up, and so many health practitioners, medical conferences, all of these things may speak to the power of nature, the power of light, whatever the case may be, and are held in these massive convention centers with artificial light, where when you spend enough time in there, within a few hours, you've got this massive headache. You need to wear blue blockers because the light is so offensive to your eyes, like the whole 9 yards. And you bring a whole different sensibility to this. So let's first of all, talking a little bit about, this kind of group of physicians now and practitioners that you have around you that you're bringing along on this journey, and how you're creating these summit experiences for them to bring it all home.
Yeah, so sure. So our practice is virtual telehealth. Our fellowship where we train providers is all online. And I think we lose something in not having physical connection and getting people together. And we've especially lost that over the last year and a half, or however long it's been now. It seems like it's been forever that this pandemic is going on. And so, yes, we've been occasionally having these summits where we really bring people together and do it in nature. We We had one in the spring, and it was really an excuse for me to bring my heroes in town and learn from them. We had people like Sam Thayer, I think is potentially the world's greatest forager, and Daniel Vitalis, and a lot of people like that. And so we're doing it again this fall, and it's going to be completely in nature. It's a pretty primitive setting, so I would warn people about that. This is not, you're not coming to a hotel. You're actually going to be connected to nature, and we're going to be teaching skills that we don't have. Like, we'll talk about the genomics and the medicine, like those are fun topics, but we're also going to talk about foraging, like I mentioned, or natural building, or fire starting, or a lot of these skills that we just don't have anymore. And they're useful, but they're also just a way to interact and connect with nature as well, with a group of like-minded folks. So selfishly, it's things that I want to do. And I'm like, all right, if we just put it on, then we'll attract other people who want to do that as well. And we'll have a great time building some community.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, so having been invited to participate in this particular Wild Health Summit, I remember I heard about it. I was like, oh my God, this is so amazing. This is so exciting. What can I contribute? And I've come up with a couple of topics that I think will be really interesting and connect into what you do. But then when I kind of looked back at it and I said, well, wait a minute, I'm going to be in a tent. And I'm going to be hanging out like in the woods or by a river with a bunch of people. And then you're sitting there going, oh my God, this is so cool. Like, I don't have to worry about having my hair done or my makeup, and I can wear my Blundstone boots. And it's an interesting thing I can imagine that it's going to be a completely different connection to the people who are between the people who are going to be there, in the sense of you're connecting with people in a very, I almost can't describe it, but it's kind of like without a lot of the accoutrements of modern life, right? The aesthetics are not that big a deal. It's just like, here I am, here's what we're doing, and let's get into the dirt. Like, let's get into it together and see what comes out, kind of thing. It's a very, and it's definitely a walking the walk, talking the talk kind of world, right?
It's a great experience in a beautiful place with beautiful people. And when I say beautiful people, I'm talking about beautiful souls. Like these, they're just good. They're just good people. We had such a great time in the spring, and we're going to have a great time this fall too. I'm really excited about you being there. I mean, we are going to have some great science topics like peptides and things like that, but it's going to be a really fun mix and a really interesting juxtaposition. It's great. It's great to, and really fun for me too, to get kind of the scientists, physicians alongside the kind of wilderness skills folks. And it's always fun to mix those two up.
It's a fire starting. I'll be able to rival my son. He was a tripper. He used to go out on these trips at camp. And so he can start a fire. And I am sitting there with my arms crossed going, I don't know. So I'll be able to get down there and blow on the little wisps of birch bark and get them to light up, or hopefully. Yeah. We do fun stuff like mushroom inoculation, how to grow your own mushrooms and logs, and fermentation skills, all kinds of really interesting things that are. And we'll do breathwork sessions. It's going to be a fun couple of days. No, it sounds great. So who can go to the Wild Health Summit?
It's open to anyone and everyone. So last time we had a lot of medical providers, but then we also just had people who were interested in this as well. So it's really for everyone. It's at wildhealthsummit.com, and anybody can sign up. Amazing.
There's a promo code, believe it or not, just my name, Natalie, with an H, that people can maybe save a little bit of money on their ticket to come on down and take part. And I think it's going to be amazing. I think it's going to be quite a unique experience and opportunity to learn from some really interesting people, and kind of get out of our own heads and get out of our ways and just kind of get into it in a different way.
Yeah. I mean, it's very different than your normal day-to-day life, and it's a really nice break, and I'm looking forward to it already.
Yeah, no, me too. Okay. So to close off, I like to ask my guests, I like to ask all my guests, if I can think of it, is if you had to give someone advice about what are the 3 things they could start doing tomorrow to make an impact on their health, to be healthier, to feel healthier, maybe to, help that immune system to work better for them in the climate that we're in, what would be the three most important things you would kind of help people to turn their attention to?
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious things we usually think of with health are food, exercise, and sleep. But what I would say about those specifically is eat, move, and sleep more naturally if you can. And when you really start thinking about that, I think you can go a long way, because like the standard American diet is not natural in any way. Our movements and going to sitting all day is not natural in any way. The way we sleep with lights on until late in the night and right before we go to bed and stimulated the entire time, and getting up with an alarm clock, none of that is natural. And we could unpack that for hours, like what's natural and what's not. But I think in general, people just started doing those things, eating, moving, and sleeping more naturally, just thinking about, okay, how would I be doing this 1,000 years ago? I think those are kind of good guiding principles in general to help go a long way in optimizing your health.
Yeah, no, I love that. And, with the eating, even getting into a world where you start to think about, am I hungry or is it time to eat? There's first of all, the aspect obviously of what you're eating and eating food that is closer to the state that it started out in. But also even paying attention to your own internal rhythms and, why am I eating right now is a big deal. And then with the sleep, I think that's such a great point. And if I'm recognizing that once we get into a healthier sleep cycle, many people don't end up needing alarm clocks unless you have to get up at some ungodly hour.
If you don't have if you don't have an Oura Ring or sleep tracker, don't have objective data, that's one thing I tell people to just don't wake up with an alarm. Like that's a first step. If you're waking up with an alarm, you're cutting that time short. And so that's a really easy thing to think about with your sleep, is you shouldn't be waking up with an alarm. You should be doing it naturally.
Yeah. And maybe that's a silver lining to the last year and a half, as less people have to commute into work and are able to work from home. Maybe it's cut people a little bit of slack in that world, and they've had the time and the space to kind of accommodate their natural sleep cycles a bit better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, anything else? Did I miss any major points? Is there anything else we need to talk about, Matt, or are we going to let people go?
No, that's great. I think if anybody has more questions or wants to learn more about us, at wildhealth.com, everything's there about the fellowship program, the summit. There's probably a link there. If you want to be a patient, any of that at wildhealth.com is where we have everything.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for today. I love this conversation. I'm totally looking forward to meeting you in person in October. And that's it.
Great. Thanks so much. Can't wait to see you there.
Likewise. Thanks so much for joining me on this episode of the Biohacking Superhuman Performance Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please remember to leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, because that's what helps us to be heard and to be seen. If you'd like to connect with me directly, or if you'd like to leave any comments, or if you have any questions about this episode, please reach out to me directly through my website, natnidham.com. And of course, if you're not already a member of the Biohacking Superhuman Performance community on Facebook, that's where you'll find me every day. It's a short application. Just answer a couple of questions and you're in and interfacing with other amazing biohackers. Thanks again, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode.